Hello, my name's Silas. The night my son was born, my own father leaned over the doctor and whispered a lie. Tell them the baby's dead. My wife begged to see him. He hissed back, a blind child is a disgrace. For 8 years I mourned a boy I thought was gone, until a blind beggar appeared on a street corner, wearing my face. We brought him home, only for my father to reach for his glass at dinner. He drank, he fell, and the DNA revealed a truth darker than murder. What would you do if the man who raised you had stolen your child? The storm outside rattled the windows of the delivery ward, each gust of wind slapping against the glass like a warning. Inside, the fluorescent lights were almost too bright, buzzing faintly above us. My hands were slick with sweat as I held Evangeline's fingers. She was gripping mine so hard that my knuckles burned. Her face glistened with tears and effort, and I whispered whatever useless words I could find to keep her breathing steady. I had been waiting for this moment, telling myself I'd finally be a father who would do things differently from my own. No more silences, no more secrets, just an honest life with the woman I loved and the child we made together. But the room was too quiet now. No newborn cry, no reassurance, only Evangeline's ragged voice. "Why isn't he crying?" she gasped, searching my eyes. The doctor didn't answer right away. He looked across the bed toward my father. Mortimer was leaning against the wall, arms folded, still wearing his overcoat like he owned the place. His face was stone, but his eyes moved quickly, first to me, then to the infant bundled in the nurse's arms. Mortimer stepped closer, his shoes clicking softly against the linoleum. He bent his head near the doctor's ear. I caught it. Just 4 words, hissed low enough for Evangeline to miss. Say he's gone. The doctor stiffened. He was a tall man, used to giving orders, not taking them. But something about my father's voice drained the fight from him. The nurse shifted uncomfortably, glancing at me, but stayed silent. "Is my baby okay?" Evangeline begged, struggling to rise from the bed. She still hadn't seen him. Her hair clung to her damp cheeks. She looked like someone drowning, reaching for a hand that wasn't there. The doctor cleared his throat. "I'm sorry. He didn't make it." The words hit me like a blunt instrument. I couldn't even speak. Evangeline let out a sound that didn't seem human, a choking cry that echoed against the sterile walls. She clawed at my arm. "Let me hold him. Please, I need to hold my baby." Mortimer moved faster than I expected for a man his age. He stepped between her and the nurse, his voice cutting like a blade. "No, a blind child is a disgrace. You will not touch him. Forget him now, for your own good." I stared at him, my mouth open. "Blind? How do you—" But the words stuck in my throat. I had known my father was controlling, cruel even, but this was something darker. Evangeline was sobbing, reaching past him, trying to see what they were hiding. The nurse turned her back to us, clutching the bundle as if it might explode. The doctor avoided my eyes, his jaw tight. I took a step forward. "Dad, what are you doing?" My voice sounded small even to me. "Protecting our name," he snapped. "You think I'll let the world know my son brought shame into this family?" My pulse roared in my ears. I wanted to grab him, to tear the truth from his mouth, but I froze. I'd spent my whole life letting him dictate what I could say, when I could speak. Even now, with my wife weeping and my child, hidden from me, I couldn't make my body move. Evangeline's voice cracked. "Silas, please, say something. Don't let them take him." I turned to her. Her eyes were wild, desperate, begging me. For a second, I almost did it. Almost shoved Mortimer aside, almost shouted until the walls shook. But something in his look stopped me. That old threat, the one that had hung over me since I was a boy. "Step out of line and you'll regret it." The doctor murmured something to the nurse. She disappeared out a side door with the bundle. Evangeline's arms fell to her sides, empty. Her sobs turned quiet, then eerily still. I watched the door close behind my son. A hollow sound filled my head, like wind rushing through an empty house. Mortimer straightened his coat, eyes cold. "From this moment," he said, "we don't speak of him again." The storm outside cracked like a rifle shot. I could taste metal on my tongue. Evangeline curled onto her side, trembling, whispering our baby's name over and over, even though she'd never been allowed to say it out loud. I stayed where I was, useless, my hands open and shaking. And as my wife cried for the child she never got to hold, I stood frozen, realizing I had just lost both my son and my voice. Hours passed in a blur after they took the baby away. The storm outside had drifted east, leaving only a low, rolling thunder that rattled the hospital's windows every so often. I sat in a vinyl chair beside Evangeline's bed, watching the fluorescent lights hum overhead. Her hair stuck to her temples, her breathing shallow. Every now and then she'd lift her head, eyes red and glassy, and look toward the door as if someone might finally walk in with our child. I hadn't moved much. My legs were stiff, but I couldn't feel them. My hands lay on my knees like two useless objects. I told myself if I just stayed still, time might rewind, and the baby's cry would echo down the hall. But only the rhythmic beep of a monitor kept time. Evangeline shifted under the thin hospital blanket. Her voice was a rasp. "Silas, tell me the truth. Was he breathing? Did you see him?" My throat tightened. I had seen him for an instant, a small face, eyes closed but moving under the lids. He was... I stopped. My father's glare from earlier still clung to me like a bruise. They said he didn't make it. She squeezed her eyes shut. Tears welled up again. "I don't believe them. I can feel him. Something's wrong." She tried to push herself upright, but the effort sent a tremor through her arms. Before I could answer, the door opened. Mortimer stepped in as if he owned the place, his coat still on, his expression fixed. The nurse trailed behind him carrying a clipboard, her eyes low to the floor. Evangeline reached toward the nurse. "Please, let me see my baby. Please, I don't care what's wrong with him. He's mine. Bring him to me." Her voice cracked, but she kept speaking, desperate, like someone pounding on a locked door. "I'm his mother. You can't keep him from me." The nurse froze halfway across the room. Her knuckles whitened on the clipboard. She opened her mouth, but Mortimer cut her off without even looking at her. "Remove her from the room. She's hysterical." The word hit the air like a slap. The nurse blinked, hesitated. For a second, I saw something flicker in her. Guilt, maybe courage. But then her eyes dropped and she moved toward Evangeline. "No!" Evangeline pulled the blanket up as if it might shield her. "I'm not leaving until I hold him." Her voice rose higher. "Why are you doing this?" I rose halfway from the chair, my pulse hammering. "Dad, stop. She just wants..." Mortimer turned his head slowly toward me. His stare was the same one that had silenced me my whole life, the look that said one wrong word and you'll regret it. I felt my jaw lock shut before I'd even finished my sentence. The nurse reached for Evangeline's arm, but Evangeline clung to me, pressing her face into my chest. Her sobs came hot through my shirt. "Why won't they let me hold him?" she whispered. "Silas, why?" I wrapped my arms around her, my fingers trembling. I wanted to tell her everything, that our child was alive, that Mortimer had ordered the lie, but the words wouldn't come. I could feel my father's presence behind me like a cold wall. Mortimer's shoes clicked on the tile as he stepped closer to the bed. "This is for the family's honor," he said, his voice steady as if reading from a rule book. "You will thank me one day." I turned my head, met his eyes. "Thank you. For what?" The question left my mouth before I could stop it. "For sparing you both a lifetime of shame." He adjusted his coat, like a man closing a deal. "You're my son. I know what's best." Evangeline shuddered against me. "Shame. He's a baby," she whispered. "A baby." My father didn't answer. He nodded once at the nurse, who backed away slowly, as if retreating from a crime scene. The door shut behind them, leaving the room thick with the smell of antiseptic and grief. I held Evangeline tighter. My mind spun, looking for some way to break the pattern, to stand up to him, but the years of obedience weighed on me like lead. Even as rage surged in my chest, it stayed caged, pacing behind my ribs. Outside, the thunder rolled again. Evangeline's tears dampened my shirt until it clung to me. She mumbled fragments of prayers, of names, of promises. I stroked her hair, not because it would help, but because it was all I had left to offer. Across the room, Mortimer stood by the window, looking out at the parking lot below. His reflection in the glass looked older, meaner, but his posture was still rigid, unbending. He didn't turn around when he spoke. The world doesn't need to know about this, and neither do you. Something cracked inside me at those words, a small fracture running through the dam I'd built all my life. I didn't speak it out loud, but I thought it. I'll never forgive you for this. The clock on the wall ticked past 3 a.m. Evangeline's sobs quieted into shallow breaths. She slid down against me, her eyes closing from exhaustion. I felt her weight grow heavier as sleep dragged her under, or maybe it was just despair. Mortimer finally left, his footsteps fading down the corridor. The door clicked shut. I sat there in the dim light, my wife in my arms, my father's words echoing in my head. That night, as Evangeline wept herself into silence, I realized the lie would outlive the child. Evangeline stopped speaking about him the same way a wound stops bleeding, not because it healed, but because there was nothing left to lose. That morning, sunlight filtered in through the blinds of our kitchen like it always did, warm, forgiving, almost deceitful. I was rinsing out my coffee mug when I heard her in the living room again, whispering. At first I thought she was on the phone, but then I recognized the rhythm of it, lullaby words to a child she still believed she might touch. 8 years had passed since the night we left that hospital. No funeral, no grave, just a silence that followed us home and unpacked its bags for good. We'd moved into a modest 2-bedroom house in the suburbs of Houston, clean lawn, quiet neighbors. The kind of place that didn't ask questions as long as your trash was out on Tuesdays and your front porch light worked. It was supposed to be a fresh start, but grief doesn't recognize zip codes. In those first years, I watched my wife disappear inch by inch. Her voice, once bright and full of mischief, became soft, unsure. She didn't hum when she did dishes anymore. The sparkle in her eyes faded, replaced by something distant. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at an empty chair or folding laundry meant for someone who wasn't there. At night, I'd hear her turn over and murmur, "Sweetheart, you're safe now. Mama's right here." And I would lie still, eyes open, listening to that imagined comfort, knowing full well I had let the truth be buried. I didn't speak of it. Not to friends, not to family. Most of them thought we'd lost the baby in the usual tragic way. A cord around the neck, a weak heartbeat, an act of God. We let them believe it. Because the real story, that my father's pride had snuffed out our chance to love our son, was too ugly to say out loud. Mortimer came by every few months, uninvited. Always dressed in slacks and a stiff collar, never a day out of place. He never asked how we were coping. He never mentioned the baby. His visits were more like inspections. "You two need to move forward," he'd say, standing in our doorway like a judge handing down a sentence. "Grief makes people weak. This isn't healthy." He'd glance around the house, sniff like something didn't smell right, and leave. I hated that he could walk out so easily, when we were still trapped in the moment he created. Evangeline never responded to him directly. She'd excuse herself to the kitchen or bathroom, or sometimes just slip out to the back porch and stare into the yard, arms wrapped around herself like armor. I knew she blamed me too. She never said it, not once, but I felt it in the way she avoided my eyes when he spoke. She didn't have to ask why I hadn't fought harder. I asked myself that every night. And yet, I stayed silent. I lived like I was holding my breath for 8 years. Going through the motions, waking up, going to work, mowing the lawn, but inside I was ashes. I carried my father's lie like a stone in my pocket, always there, pressing against me when I tried to move forward. We didn't try for another child. There was no conversation about it, just an invisible agreement between two people who had once made something beautiful, only to have it taken by the ugliest parts of family. I tried to bury myself in routine, fixing things around the house, reading manuals, watching baseball, pretending those things could fill the cracks. But the worst part, worse than the silence or the guilt, was the forgetting. Not of him, but of myself. I became a man I didn't recognize. Someone who flinched at confrontation, who looked over his shoulder in his own home, who smiled politely when Mortimer insulted us with that thin voice wrapped in moral superiority. I built walls inside myself so tall I almost forgot I was still alive. That thought came to me one night while I was shaving. I stared into the mirror, foam clinging to my jaw, and I didn't see a father or a husband. I saw a coward, a man who let someone else decide what kind of father he'd be, what kind of man. Evangeline walked in, quiet as always. She stood behind me for a moment, then turned away without a word. That was how we lived, always near each other, but never quite together. Like the grief had divided our home into invisible borders we didn't dare cross. And then, the silence cracked. It was a Sunday morning, just like any other. We were walking through the local farmer's market. Evangeline liked the sunflowers there. I wasn't paying attention, just sipping my lukewarm coffee, trying to guess how many hours I'd have to make small talk with our neighbors. She suddenly stopped walking. Her hand gripped my forearm tight, too tight. "Silas," she whispered. Yet her voice shook. "Look." I followed her gaze. Standing near the corner just beside the honey stall was a boy, maybe 7 or 8, dirty jeans, threadbare shirt, he had a white cane, and his face, my heart stopped. But the silence shattered the day my wife grabbed my arm and whispered, "Look, it's him." Evangeline's grip on my arm tightened as if anchoring herself against a flood. I followed her gaze, squinting under the midday sun that bounced hard off the sidewalk. The boy stood just across the intersection next to a dented trash can outside a gas station. His head tilted slightly toward the sky, and from his small, cracked lips came a song, something gentle and strange, half-hummed, half-prayed. He couldn't have been older than 8. His clothes hung off him like they were made for someone twice his size, and his shoes, mismatched and splitting at the seams, barely clung to his feet. A thin white cane lay across his lap. Beside it, a tin cup held a few scattered coins. Then I saw it, the jawline, the sharpness in the bridge of his nose, the slope of his brow. It was like staring into a faded mirror of myself. My stomach dropped, my vision tunneled. The traffic sounds, the conversations, the chaos of the street, all faded into a deep silence as the world spun on an unfamiliar axis. My legs trembled beneath me. I gripped the pole next to the crosswalk like it was the only thing keeping me upright. Evangeline whispered again, but this time it wasn't a question. "That's our son. I feel it in my bones." I wanted to argue, to tell her she was seeing what she longed to see. That grief had painted a ghost on a stranger's face, but the words wouldn't come. I stared harder, trying to disprove her, hoping to find a flaw in the resemblance. But the more I looked, the more I saw myself at 8 years old. The same chin, the way his mouth curled downward when he wasn't singing. That boy, that child, was mine. I stepped off the curb, half aware of the honk that jolted me back. Evangeline grabbed my hand tightly and crossed with me. The closer we got, the more the world slowed down. He didn't see us coming. His eyes, pale and vacant, stared into the sunlight as he sang. His voice carried a haunting calm, far too old for his tiny frame. "Excuse me," I said, my throat catching on the words. He stopped, his head turned slightly toward my voice. "Yes, sir." His tone was soft but steady, polite, cautious. His cane moved slightly as he adjusted his seat on the milk crate beneath him. I knelt to his level, Evangeline hovering just behind me, hands clasped like she was holding prayer itself between them. "What's your name, son?" I asked. He hesitated, then answered, "Lucian. Lucian." It echoed in my chest like a name I should have spoken 1,000 times already. A name that should have been printed on birthday cakes, scribbled on drawings stuck to the fridge, called from across playgrounds. Instead, it lived in a mouth that shouldn't have known it. "Do you have any family, Lucian?" Evangeline's voice cracked as she spoke. He shrugged. "Just me." Been like that a long time. The wind picked up, brushing dust along the sidewalk. I wanted to wrap my arms around him, to pick him up and never let go, but I stayed still. I needed more. Needed to be sure, even though my heart already knew. "Lucien," I said gently, "do you know how long you've been out here?" He tilted his head. "They told me I was a baby when I was left. I don't remember much. Just voices sometimes, in dreams." I didn't realize I was crying until I felt Evangeline's hand press a tissue into mine. My fingers were trembling so badly I couldn't grip it. Hope, that traitor, flooded back into me like blood rushing to a limb. I thought long dead. I had buried that part of me. Grieved him. Built a life around the void. And now, here he was, breathing, singing, living under the sky we thought he'd never see. We stayed with him there on the curb for nearly an hour, asking small questions. Nothing too pointed, nothing that might scare him. He spoke like someone used to disappointment, measured, cautious, unsure what to expect from kindness. And still, there was a warmth beneath his words, a strength. When we offered him food, he smiled and nodded. We walked to a nearby sandwich shop, Evangeline gently guiding his steps. Watching her place a hand lightly on his shoulder, it cracked something inside me I hadn't realized was still holding. Later, as we drove home, Lucien sat in the back seat humming to himself. He didn't ask many questions, he just listened, touched the fabric of the seat, ran his fingers along the edge of the window. Every movement was deliberate, thoughtful, like he was memorizing the world through touch. Evangeline reached over and squeezed my hand. Her eyes met mine, full of fear and awe. "We can't leave him out there again," she said. "No matter what your father says." She didn't have to explain. I knew what was coming. Mortimer, his anger, his control, his obsession with appearances, and I knew what I had to do. That night, as we sat in our living room with the boy between us, I knew my father would come for him. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. Lucien slept with the peacefulness only children seem to possess, yet each time he smiled, I saw shadows behind it, echoes of alleys and winters he should have never known. Evangeline doted on him with a gentleness so fierce it broke something in me. We tried to build normal, one breakfast, one bedtime story at a time. Then came the invitation, a formal family dinner, the kind Mortimer hosted twice a year to remind everyone who sat where in the dynasty. I stared at the envelope longer than I should have, wondering if it was a warning disguised as courtesy. Evangeline, sitting beside me on the porch swing, looked up and said quietly, "This is where our son belongs." So we went. The estate looked exactly as I remembered it, regal, silent, and cold. The drive was lined with manicured trees, every branch pruned into obedience. Lucien clutched Evangeline's hand, his other hand running along the textured seams of his suit. I had bought him that blazer just days ago. He'd asked me what color it was. "Navy," I told him. He'd nodded, then smiled faintly and said, "Feels like it's trying to be important." Mortimer greeted us at the door, expression as tight as his tie. He scanned Lucien up and down with the clinical precision of someone judging livestock, not blood. His voice was thin. "You brought him." "I did," I replied evenly, feeling the weight of Evangeline's hand on the small of my back. Mortimer said nothing more. He turned and we followed. Through corridors I once ran through as a boy, now lined with portraits that stared down like silent judges. The dining room was already half full. Family, old friends, a few business associates whose smiles were as sharp as their tailored suits. We took our seats. Evangeline and I were placed mid-table, not quite at the bottom, not near the head. But Lucien, he was directed to the far end. A folding chair beside the swinging kitchen door, the hum of servers passing behind him, the clang of silver trays. It wasn't a seat, it was a message. I felt my chest tighten. He sat quietly, hands folded in his lap. No one spoke to him, not even the cousins his age. I caught one glance his way, then the hushed snicker from across the table. "Why is the servant's boy sitting here?" one of them murmured. My chair scraped as I stood. The room turned, but before I could speak, Mortimer raised his glass. "A toast," he said, smiling with perfect restraint, "to the legacy of this family, untainted and strong." Silence. Then glasses lifted, forced smiles, a round of clinks. I sat back down. Not from agreement, but because Evangeline's hand found mine under the table and squeezed hard. Her eyes were brimming, but her jaw was set. My fingers curled tightly around the base of my wine glass. Every bite I took felt like chewing gravel. The roast was dry. The potatoes bland. Or maybe it was just me, sitting in a room where my child had been erased in front of me, where I was not just dismissed, but rewritten. Lucien remained still. He didn't eat much. He didn't speak. But he wasn't cowed either. There was a dignity in his posture that made my shame worse. I wanted to reach out, bring him to my side, shout the truth into every smug face at that table. But I swallowed it. I swallowed it all. After dinner, Lucian stood with Evangeline near the hallway, his fingers gently tracing the wallpaper grooves. I stepped out onto the veranda to get air. Mortimer followed moments later. He lit a cigar like we were about to talk business. "You should know," he began. "This was indulgent enough. Bringing him here again would be a mistake." I didn't answer. "He doesn't belong. You understand that, don't you?" I turned to him finally. "You buried your own grandson. Lied to your own son. And now you want to pretend nothing happened? I did what was necessary. For the family. For you." "No," I said, voice low, trembling. "You did what was easy for you. There's a difference." He took a drag, the smoke curling around his head like a halo made of fire. "You'll thank me one day." I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was too much fury, too much grief fighting inside me for space. So I walked away. Back inside, past the portraits, past the whispers, to the boy who bore my face and yet had no place at the table that should have been his. That night, as Lucian fell asleep on the couch with his head in Evangeline's lap, I looked at the untouched glass of juice on the coffee table, the one he hadn't drunk at dinner. And for the first time, I wondered if my father's cruelty stopped at humiliation, or if something darker had slipped into my son's glass. All week, the thought burrowed deeper. Had Mortimer's cruelty finally slipped into something tangible, something deadly? I replayed the image of Lucien's untouched juice over and over. Evangeline sensed my unease but didn't press. She just held my arm a little tighter each night before we turned off the lights. Lucien, unaware, hummed himself to sleep with little tunes he'd picked up on the street, his voice soft and sure. That sound kept me anchored, even as my suspicions grew. Another invitation came, another family dinner. This time, no envelope, just a call. Mortimer's voice was flat, perfunctory. "It's expected," he said, then hung up. Evangeline wanted to refuse. I almost did. But I couldn't shake the thought. If I didn't go, he'd take the fight somewhere else, at least in the estate I could watch. So on Friday evening, we returned. The same heavy doors opened into the same heavy air. This time the dining room was brighter, candles flickering on polished silver, but the atmosphere felt staged, brittle. Lucian walked between us, his small hand warm in mine. He wore the same navy blazer. "It smells different tonight," he murmured as we passed the hallway. I squeezed his hand, but said nothing. At the table, Mortimer was all warmth for the guests, shaking hands, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, but his eyes, when they landed on us, were ice. "Sit," he said simply. Lucian was again directed to the far end, closer this time to the centerpiece, as if to suggest inclusion without actually granting it. Dinner began, clinking forks, muted chatter. Mortimer's voice dominating the conversation with talk of legacy and partnerships. My pulse refused to settle. I kept scanning the table, the servants, the glasses, and then I saw it. Mortimer reached for the decanter of water, filled Lucien's cup halfway. As he set the decanter down, his other hand moved quick, practiced. A clear vial, a flick of his wrist, barely a drop, but enough. It vanished back into his pocket before anyone else noticed. I stopped breathing. Lucian's fingers reached for the glass. Time slowed, warped. My heartbeat roared in my ears. Evangeline was speaking to a guest, oblivious. Mortimer was still talking, smiling. No one else saw, just me. Lucien lifted the glass. My hand slammed down on the table, rattling plates. The glass tipped, spilling across the linen, a clear streak running toward the edge. Gasps erupted around the table. "Silas!" Evangeline hissed. Mortimer's face flickered, surprise, then instant recovery. "Clumsy child," he said coolly, nodding toward Lucien. "He should learn to control himself." Every head turned to Lucien, not Mortimer. The boy froze, then withdrew his hand, confusion clouding his features. He hadn't even touched the cup. I started, but Mortimer's eyes snapped to mine, dark and sharp as blades. A warning, a dare. Guests murmured, shifting in their seats. Someone coughed. But no one spoke up. No one ever did. Mortimer's grip on them was older than I was. Evangeline rose quickly, wrapping an arm around Lucien. "He's tired," she said with forced brightness. "We should go." Mortimer lifted his glass in a mock toast. "By all means," he murmured. "Family first." We left before dessert. In the car, Evangeline's hands trembled on the steering wheel. "What happened?" she asked finally. I stared out the window, the estate shrinking in the distance. "He tried to kill him," I said quietly. "Right there, in front of everyone." She sucked in a breath, eyes wet. Lucien, in the back seat, rested his head against the window. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked softly. I turned, took his hand. "No, son," I said, my voice steady, though my chest was breaking. "You did nothing wrong." Silence filled the car, thick and electric. I felt complicit, dirty. Yes, I'd knocked the glass over, but I hadn't exposed him, not yet. And if I stayed silent again, I'd bury Lucien twice. Back home, Evangeline tucked Lucien into bed while I sat at the kitchen table staring at my hands. They were still trembling. Through the open window, I heard the city humming, traffic, voices, life going on as if ours wasn't unraveling. I clenched my fists. The time for silence was ending. And then, the world outside our home delivered its cruelest judgment, mocking my son in public. After the dinner at Mortimer's estate, Evangeline barely spoke. She moved through the house like she was balancing glass on her shoulders, quiet, careful, fragile. Lucien, on the other hand, seemed unfazed. He hummed the way he always did, folded napkins into little animals at the breakfast table, asked me questions I still didn't know how to answer. But I couldn't sleep. Not well. Not with that image stuck in my head. His small hand lifting the glass, and my father watching him the way a hawk watches a mouse. So when Evangeline suggested we get away for a few days, just the three of us, I agreed. We chose Chicago, a city far enough from Mortimer's reach and full of strangers who wouldn't know Lucien's name, wouldn't whisper behind polished wine glasses or smirk across long tables. We rented a small hotel room off Michigan Avenue. Nothing fancy, just enough space for a suitcase each and the hope of fresh air. On the second afternoon, we strolled through a plaza lined with cafes and small boutiques, Lucien's cane tapping gently ahead of him. It was sunny, too warm for jackets, and the streets buzzed with life, horns, music spilling from shop doors, the soft clatter of cutlery from outdoor tables. For a while, it felt like we were just another family out for a walk, until it didn't. We'd paused near a fountain. Lucien asked if he could listen to a street violinist performing across the way. Evangeline and I nodded, and we found a bench nearby. I was watching Lucien, his head tilted, eyes closed, lips moving like he was silently echoing the melody, when a voice from behind cut through the music. "If he weren't blind," the man chuckled, "he might be worth something." The words came like a slap, not shouted, not even loud, just casually tossed into the air like a cigarette flicked to the pavement. I turned. A man in his 40s, khakis too tight around the waist, sunglasses perched arrogantly on his forehead. He sipped his coffee and smirked at his friend, like it was just another afternoon joke. I stood. Evangeline grabbed my wrist instinctively, sensing it before I could move. "Silas," she warned softly. Lucien, still seated, tensed. I saw his hands curl slightly on his lap. He'd heard it. Of course he had. For a split second, all I saw was red. My fists itched. I wanted to crush the man's smug mouth into silence. I wanted him to understand the violence of his words. But then, Lucien turned his head toward the sound and asked, "Did I do something wrong?" That cut deeper than the insult. I knelt in front of him, looked into those sightless eyes that still somehow saw more than most people ever would. "No," I said, barely keeping my voice steady. "You are worth everything." He nodded slowly, though a tear slipped down his cheek. Not from pain, I think, but from knowing. He always knew more than he let on. We left the plaza after that, walked quietly for a while, through streets that suddenly felt narrower, colder. Back in the hotel room, Evangeline helped Lucien take off his shoes and tucked him into bed for a nap. Then she came to me. "You were right to stop," she said. I didn't feel right. I felt ashamed, not just for that moment, but for every moment I had stood by and let my father define my son's worth. I sat down by the window staring out at the traffic. "He's going to grow up thinking the world sees him as broken." "No," she said, "only if we let him." And that's when it hit me, clearer than it ever had before. It wasn't Mortimer's opinion that mattered most. It was mine. It was the lies I'd swallowed, the silence I'd chosen. I had let my father shape the narrative, and in doing so, I'd left Lucien unshielded. That ends now. I went to my suitcase, pulled out the manila folder I'd tucked beneath my shirts. Inside, copies of business documents, real estate filings, hospital records, anything tied to Mortimer, anything he had touched with his deceitful hands. Evangeline watched as I laid them out on the bed. "What are you doing?" "Gathering ammunition." "For what?" I looked at her, and for the first time in years, I felt the heat of purpose rise in my chest. "For war." So I gathered every lie my father told, every paper he signed, every voice he silenced, and prepared for war. It started with a phone call. I told him I wanted to move forward, to put the past behind us. I played my part. Calm, careful, rehearsed. Mortimer didn't trust easily, but he loved control more than caution. The invitation came swiftly after. A formal dinner. "Just family," he said. "Just us, like old times." I hung up the phone and stared at my reflection in the hallway mirror. I didn't see a son anymore. I saw a soldier. 3 nights later, the sky cracked open as we pulled into the gravel driveway. Thunder rolled behind us like distant cannon fire. Lucian sat between Evangeline and me in the back seat, his hands clasped in his lap, blind to the storm, but not to the tension crawling up my spine. The estate loomed ahead, lit by golden windows, but colder than any shelter should feel. Evangeline reached across the seat and touched my hand. "Let's end this," she whispered. Mortimer greeted us at the grand doors, his eyes brushing over Lucien like the boy was a forgotten item in the corner of a ledger. He extended no warmth, only a forced smile and a nod toward the dining hall. "Shall we begin?" Inside, everything felt staged, like a scene in a play we weren't meant to survive. Servants in white gloves, the chandelier flickering above crystal glasses. Family members already seated, their conversations hushed and clipped, eyes flicking to Lucien with veiled curiosity or disdain. Mortimer sat at the head of the long table. I took my place halfway down, with Lucien beside me and Evangeline across. Dishes were served, wine was poured, and then it happened. Mortimer leaned slightly forward, reaching toward the center of the table. His hand hovered briefly, too briefly, over Lucien's glass. I watched his fingers curl as he lifted one, tilted it ever so slightly, and replaced it. He looked up at me, almost daring me to speak. I didn't blink. I waited. Lucien, unaware, reached for the glass. My heart slammed into my chest. I rose. My hand moved before thought could form. I swapped the glasses. It happened so fast no one saw. Or maybe they did, and chose silence as always. Mortimer raised his own drink, a toast. "To the future of our family," he said smoothly, lifting the glass that was meant for my son. He drank. Seconds passed. Then, his breath caught. His hand flew to his throat. His face flushed deep crimson, then paled. The glass shattered on the floor. Gasps rang out. Chairs scraped. Someone screamed. Evangeline clutched Lucien to her, shielding him from the chaos. Servants froze, unsure whether to act or stand down. I didn't move. I watched. Mortimer fell to one knee, then to the floor. His fingers clawed at the rug, the veins in his neck rising like cords stretched to the point of snapping. I knelt beside him, not to help, but to speak. "You tried to poison him, didn't you?" I whispered into his ear. "You've poisoned everything." His eyes widened, searching for denial, for the control he always wielded, but it was gone. And with it, so was he. The room spun in confusion, some shouting for help, others looking at me in horror, unsure what they had just witnessed. I stood slowly, steadying my voice. "There was something in that glass," I said, calm but firm. "Ask the staff, ask the security cameras, ask the boy." And then I pulled from my coat pocket the envelope I'd carried for weeks. DNA results. "I had it tested," I said, laying the paper down on the table like a final card in a losing hand. "Lucien is my son. Mine. You all knew it, or suspected it, but he was blind. So my father decided he wasn't fit to carry the name." Silence. Heavy. Accusatory. He paid off a doctor, changed the certificate, had him placed elsewhere. Told me my son died that night. Evangeline's face was streaked with tears, but she stood with her head held high. Lucien remained quiet, but I saw the understanding behind his still eyes. And in that moment, I felt something shift, not just in the room, but inside me. For years, I had been buried beneath my father's shadow, convinced his power was absolute. But power doesn't last. Truth does. And now truth had a voice. As Mortimer's body cooled, the house of lies he built began to burn, starting with me holding the match. The morning of the funeral came cloaked in a heavy sky, thick with the kind of gray that soaks into your clothes before a single drop falls. We dressed in black, not out of grief, but out of custom. The town expected it. The family demanded it. I complied, for one last performance. The estate looked almost proud of itself. Dressed in bunting and floral displays Mortimer would have deemed dignified. There were men in suits who hadn't seen him in years, and women in pearls who never liked him alive, but wouldn't miss a picture next to his casket. I spotted familiar faces, some relatives, some business partners, not one tear between them. Lucien held my hand as we walked the path toward the chapel. He couldn't see the marble archway, the polished wood, or the expensive show of sorrow around us, but I knew he felt it, the hush in the air, the weight in the silence. Evangeline walked beside us, her fingers wrapped tightly around his other hand. Inside, the coffin rested under stained glass that painted the room with hollow color. Mortimer's portrait sat beside it, smiling, of course. The man always did know which mask to wear. Rows of chairs stretched behind us, filled with stiff spines and murmured gossip. "Heard it was poison," one whispered. "Some kind of scandal. Legal documents and a blind boy. I thought Silas left years ago." I heard every word, and I let them hang in the air like smoke. When it came time to approach the coffin, I stepped forward slowly. No bouquet in my hands, no Bible passage on my lips, just an envelope. It was the same one I'd left unopened for years in the back of a drawer, only recently filled with DNA results, Mortimer's letters, and one page of his ledger. I placed it gently atop the polished surface. "This," I whispered, "is yours. Not a gift, not a goodbye. Just the truth, left with the man who spent his life burying it." Back at the house, guests lingered for appearances. The staff passed out drinks. Conversations resumed, teeth bared in fake smiles. I walked through them like a ghost in my own life. None of them looked me in the eye. But Evangeline did. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her grip on my arm said enough. Later that evening, when the house finally emptied, we returned home. Lucien sat on the couch, legs tucked under him, gently humming the tune he always returned to when the world became too loud. That soft melody, rising from somewhere deep inside him, was more sacred than anything said at that funeral. I poured myself a glass of water, sat beside him, and closed my eyes. There were no fireworks, no declarations, no medals pinned to my chest, but something inside me had changed. I wasn't just the man Mortimer tried to erase. I was a father. I was a voice. And I had finally spoken. The next morning, we walked together through the garden. The sun filtered through branches heavy with late spring bloom. I guided Lucien along the gravel paths, describing the colors out loud, the red of the roses, the soft lavender, the deep green of new leaves. He listened with his whole body, pausing often to tilt his head or run his fingers over the bark of a tree. He stopped once, turned toward my voice, and asked, "Is this ours now?" I knelt beside him. "No, son," I said, pulling his hand into mine. "This has always been yours. You were just kept from it." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. He smiled and took another step forward. As he walked, guided not by sight but by trust, I followed behind him. Every step forward was a choice, a defiance, a promise. "You will never be hidden again," I whispered, more to myself than to him, because this time I was watching. This time I wouldn't look away. And if your family ever tried to erase you, remember, their shame is not your inheritance.